the opening of the 44th session of the United Nations General Assembly. The featured speaker is Romania's Minister of Foreign Affairs.
Mr. President, it gives me particular pleasure to congratulate you on the occasion of your election as President of the 44th session of the General Assembly and to address to you our best wishes of success in the accomplishment of this high assignment. Mr. President, on the instruction of the President of the Socialist Republic of Romania, Nicolae Ceausescu, I have the honor to present before this Assembly the views and the proposals of the Romania on the current war situation and on the lines of action to achieve a radical change in international life and the solution of the problems prevailing in the world. The evolution of world events reveals two diametrically opposite trends. On one hand, as a result of the common endeavors of peoples everywhere and of the powerful action of public opinion for peace and disarmament, which also included the progressive political cultures in various countries, as well as the action of the United Nations, a number of changes have taken place. A relative balance has emerged between the forces we stand for detente, understanding and cooperation, and those who oppose them. Thus, during the recent years, important steps have been made in the direction of disarmament and the solution through negotiations of some international conflicts. On the other hand, one could witness the intensification of interference in the internal affairs of other states, but by some governmental quarters aiming at political destabilization in certain countries and imposition of terms of cooperation in line with their hegemonic interests. The arms race has been going on, especially in the field of development and modernization of nuclear arms and of other arms of mass destruction. The doctrine of nuclear deterrence continues to be pursued by some states, which in practical terms means the pursuance of the threat of force in international life. The militarization of outer space has already started. The international situation is gravely affected by the world economic crisis, which for the last years has further widened the gap between the rich and the poor countries. Hotbeds of tension and conflicts in some parts of the world continue to persist, and some of them have grown worse. Against this background, the promotion of a new mentality with regard to the interstate relations and of a new approach for the solution of international problems has become an objective necessity. Both should be based on the unabated respect of the principles of relations between states, especially of the full equality of rights, national independence and sovereignty, non-interference in domestic affairs, non-use of threat of use of force, mutual advantage. In the light of this principle enshrined in the United Nations Charter and other international documents, Romania proposes that the General Assembly should consider and adopt concrete measures concerning the observance by all states of the principles of peaceful coexistence among states with different social and political systems, the elimination of all acts and forms of interference aimed at changing the social and political system of other countries. In our days, when the right of each people freely to choose its own way of social and economic development is internationally recognized, one cannot accept any form of relation of subordination. Neither can one accept any action by governmental circles to differentiate among the relations with socialist countries, depending on the internal changes to be made by them which would respond to the ideological and political interests of Western countries. At the same time, one should act firmly against the neo-colonial policy of imperialist forces aimed at keeping the developing countries in the state of suppliers of cheap primary commodities and sources of high profits for the international financial capital. To this end, Romania proposes that the current session should consider and adopt concrete measures concerning the elimination in international economic relations of policies conditioning the development of trade and economic cooperation on the adoption of measures to turn private the public sector or impose free market and other structural changes proper to the capitalist economy. In line with the provisions of the Charter of Economic Rights and Duties of States, the United Nations should call upon all governments to respect the right of each people to economic and social development according to its own historic and social conditions and its sovereign options in organizing domestic life. This is reflected in the independent policy of each state. At the same time, in view of the provisions of the United Nations Charter whereby states undertook to develop their relations in a spirit of friendship and mutual respect, Romania believes that the United Nations should endeavor to involve the mass media in a broad cooperative effort in this area. To that end, one should oppose any manifestation of biased, misleading presentation of the condition in various countries. This old forum should consider and adopt concrete measures concerning the responsibility of states, governmental and non-governmental organizations, as well as of mass media, in promoting relations of friendship and cooperation, rapprochement and mutual respect among governments and peoples. To that end, the coverage of real life in each country of efforts made by their peoples for economic and social development shall be correct and fair. Mr. President, the events which took place 50 years ago are there to prove that duplicity of the great powers, their policies of appeasement and compromises with fascism and Nazism, the lack of unity of peoples, of anti-fascist and anti-war forces have cleared the way for the outbreak of the gigantic world conflagration. Today, mindful of the lessons drawn from history, one cannot but be deeply worried by the obvious rise in the activities of some right-wing and neo-fascist organizations by the racist, nationalist, chauvinist propaganda for revision of borders. That is why it is imperative for all social and political forces to mobilize themselves in order to ensure peace and security, prevent and oppose any act of aggression or revanchist and neo-Nazi manifestation. Mr. President, in view of the fact that the fundamental challenge of our time is the cessation of the arms race and the resolute action towards disarmament, especially to nuclear disarmament, as well as the strengthening of the role of the United Nations in matters pertaining to peace and disarmament, Romania submits for consideration the following proposals and lines of actions. The General Assembly should call on all member states to put an end to the modernization and to the development of nuclear weapons and to renounce to the doctrine of nuclear deterrence. All nuclear tests should be ceased and an international conference be convened on a possible extension of the 1963 treaty banning nuclear weapons tests in the atmosphere, in outer space and underwater, to cover also the discontinuance of nuclear underground tests. The General Assembly should reiterate the appeal addressed to the USSR and the USA to conclude, and the earliest possible date, a treaty on the 50% reduction of their strategic nuclear armament. All participating states in the Geneva Conference on Disarmament should commit themselves to negotiate the prohibition of production and stockpiling of chemical weapons, along with the negotiations aimed at total elimination of nuclear armaments. The General Assembly should launch an appeal calling for effective agreements at Vienna negotiations to ensure the substantial reduction by at least 50% by the end of the century of troops, conventional armaments and military expenditures under an international strict and effective control. The General Assembly should proclaim the next 1999 decade as the third disarmament decade. The goals of the third disarmament decade should be reduction and ultimate elimination of nuclear weapons, cessation of nuclear tests, renunciation of the militarization of outer space, creation of zones free of nuclear and chemical weapons in various regions of the world, substantial reduction of troops, conventional armaments, and military expenditures. In order to improve the international political climate, achieve deterrent and ensure peace, Romania resolutely stands for the cessation of all conflicts in different parts of the world on the basis of equitable solutions, which would take into account the need strictly to observe the legitimate interest of peoples in the area. In line with this position, Romania proposes the following. The United Nations should reaffirm the obligation assumed by member states to renounce the use of force in their relations and unabatedly to respect the right of each people freely to choose its way of development without any interference from outside. The United Nations should ensure that any action which is aimed at the solution of various conflicts will not lead to the elimination of the progressive achievement of the peoples in their respective regions. The United Nations should support the effective organization of the earliest possible date of an international conference on Middle East with the participation of all interested states, including the new state of Palestine and of Israel, as well as of the permanent members of the Security Council. The provision of the Security Council Resolution 435 should be fully implemented in order to proclaim the independence of Namibia this year. As to the further involvement of the United Nations in the resolution of various conflicts, it is necessary, in our view, to resort to the UN peacekeeping forces only when such operations are absolutely required. Also, the inspections should be limited as much as possible and be borne on voluntary basis, primarily by the countries involved in the conflict and by developed countries. We reaffirm that this session to our solidarity and active support for the position initiatives of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea aimed at a peaceful, democratic, and independent reunification of Korea. In view of the serious condition of world economy caused by the imperialist policy of inequality and exploitation by unfair monetary and financial policies, Romania considers that an essential imperative for ensuring world progress and peace is the urgent solution of the external debt crisis affecting developing countries, the elimination of underdevelopment, and the establishment of equitable economic relations among states. As a developing country, Romania is fully aware of the consequences of the current state of affairs in the world economy and especially of the heavy burden represented by the external debt, which is one of the most serious problems facing developing countries. By fully mobilizing her entire material and human potential, Romania has succeeded to liberate herself from this burden as of March 1989. This achievement has a profound significance for securing the economic and political independence of the country. In order to reach this goal, our option was to redouble the efforts of investment during the decade. This made it possible to pay off the external debt without hampering at the same time the programs of economic development or the living standard and the income of the population. Based on our own experience and having a direct knowledge of the practices of the International Monetary Fund, of the World Bank, and of other major international banks, the economic and political conditions imposed by them, which have destabilizing effects on the developing countries and cause transfer of wealth from these countries to the main developed countries, we consider that the radical improvement of the international credit and interest system has become a matter of top priority, calling for urgent action. To this effect, Romania presents the following proposals. A maximum fixed interest rate of 4 to 5% to be set up for the credits granted by the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and other major banks. The amount of existing credits should be recalculated on the basis of maximum interest rate of 2 to 3%. When providing new credits, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank should renounce the so-called programs of economic adjustment of colonialist type. Especially urgent is the need to put an end to those conditions which are aimed at privatizing economic sectors and units. Romania considers that the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank should channel their credits primarily to the public and cooperative sectors in order to ensure the economic and social development of the countries concerned, to accelerate their progress and improve the living condition of their peoples. At the same time, it is to be mentioned that in all countries the public sector provides more secure conditions for the financial institutions themselves. The World Bank and other creditor banks should put an end to their practices by which the provision of new financial credits is conditioned on taking under control the production of primary commodities in developing countries. Such practices applied by major international banks ensure high profits to the financial capital while exploiting the wealth of developing countries. One should set reasonable and equitable prices for the primary commodities supplied by developing countries in order to bridge the gap between commodity prices and the prices paid for imported manufactured products. This would put an end to the transfer of wealth from developing to developed countries. Only last year, as a result of the system of credit and high interest charged by the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and other banks, as well as of the existing price system, the transfer of financial resources from developing to developed countries has amounted to over $32 billion. Romania presents these proposals also in her capacity as a member of the International Monetary Fund and of the World Bank, since she cannot accept to be an accomplice to the neocolonial policies applied by those financial institutions. The revitalization of international cooperation and economic development, particularly of developing countries, calls for an appropriate preparation of the 1990 special session of the General Assembly. The special session should provide a framework for negotiation between developed and developing countries with a view to agreeing on global solutions for the problems of underdevelopment, international financial and trade relations, and the external debt of developing countries. Mr. President, in the present international conditions, marked by serious problems generated by the arms race, underdevelopment, the continuation of the policy of force and interference in internal affairs, there is an impelling need more than ever before for the participation of all states on equal footing in the search for solutions to those problems. In line with Romania's firm stand for disarmament and peace and the democratic solution of all complex issues of our times, the Romanian delegation will resolutely act along with other delegations so that through joining efforts in an atmosphere of understanding and mutual respect, the current session should be able to open up sound perspective for a better world. As recently emphasized by President Nicolae Ceausescu, the implementation of radical changes in international relations calls on all peoples, progressive and democratic forces everywhere, to do their utmost in order to ensure the triumph of reason, the achievement of general disarmament, peaceful settlement of conflict through negotiations, and development of cooperation on equal terms among all nations. Thank you, Mr. President.
For a handy guide to the House of Representatives and the United States Senate, order C-SPAN's 10th anniversary edition of the U.S. Congress Handbook. The handbook provides photographs, biographies, and committee assignments for each member of Congress, and offers practical tips on writing a member of Congress, ordering government publications, and tracking legislation. To order your copy, send a check or money order for $6.95 to C-SPAN Congress Handbook, 444 North Capitol Street Northwest, Suite 412, Washington, D.C., 20001. Please allow 3 weeks for delivery.